Welcome to the Grit.org podcast with Colby Harris and Brian Harbin. In these episodes, they speak to top achievers in athletics and business to understand the habits and mindset they apply in order to build more grit.
I can! I will! I'm going to!
Welcome back to the Grit.org podcast. My name's Colby Harris. Alongside me is Brian Harbin, and we are here with today's guest, Stephen Gold. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So graduated from Bolles High School, went on to swim at Yale, got a law degree, went back to UF and got a degree there as well at University of Pennsylvania, spent some time there. So we're going to talk a little bit about his education and then also venturing into his first business startup, now CEO and founder of Refresh Mental Health. So we have Stephen here today to talk about his experience of growth and grit. So go ahead and get into it a little bit. You attended Bolles High School. You're a board member there to this day. Tell us more about your upbringing. Were you raised in Jacksonville and what you really love about the city?
Great. Yeah. Actually, I wasn't raised in Jacksonville. I grew up in the Northeast in New Jersey and Connecticut. Came to Jacksonville really for the Bolles swim team and obviously the high school as well. But I was a boarder. So I lived at Bolles my sophomore year on and, really just loved Jacksonville. And later on in life, had the opportunity to come back here. My wife's a physician at the Mayo Clinic, and Mayo had recruited her, and we were really comfortable with Jacksonville because I spent so much time here.
Yeah, can't complain about sun 300 days a year.
No.
Afternoon rains aren't ideal, but it's not too bad.
It's a great place to live, raise a family, as well as to grow a business.
Mm-hmm. And so you said grew up in Connecticut. And moved to Jacksonville. I guess we were 16 years old. So tell us about growing up in Connecticut, just your family life, how you got into sports. And
Yeah, sure. So up north, parents are looking for activities for kids to do in the winter. So you're kind of playing ice hockey or maybe you're in a pool. And I was in a pool. I grew up really playing baseball in the springs and swimming pretty much year round. And I played baseball all the way through ninth grade up north. And then when I came to Jacksonville for Bolles for swimming was really when I decided, I needed to just focus full time on swimming. But growing up, I was, a top, swimmer in New Jersey, nationally ranked, and I was an All-American multiple times in high school. So I was an elite level swimmer. And I was, decent at baseball. I would make the all-star teams, but not at that level with swimming. So I really knew that at that stage of my life, it was time to focus on one sport.
And so tell us about why swimming. Where that passion kind of developed. And
I think I like being in the water, number one. It did give me an activity to do when it's freezing cold, outside in the winters. And I was good at it, and I could see the times. Swimming is a time sport; it's individual, except for relays. But you follow your times, and the harder you work, you can see your times drop, and you can make progress, and then you can see your rankings improve. And so I got a lot of feedback, positive feedback through success, in swimming, and I think that led to me liking it more and more, even though it's an extremely difficult, painful sport as far as practice and the meets as well. But you learn to kind of even like the pain, the feeling out of breath, that there is that kind of runner's high you get in swimming as well.
Mm. Yeah, I can definitely second that. I picked up surfing in 6th grade when I moved to Florida as an individual sport. First time trying that, usually basketball, soccer, things like that. And that's what I always tell people. It's I loved being able to put my time in on my schedule, push myself, and see the growth when I was competing and things like that. So I love that about swimming as well.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about going to Bolles. And you said you were a boarding student. I've never been a boarding student, but I've met a lot of kids, friends and family that boarded at various schools. So tell us a bit about your experience with that and that transition.
So I think kids could benefit from being boarding students. I think that high school age, most kids are ready for that experience. It does make you grow up a lot faster, I would say. You're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for your homework, making your bed, cleaning your room, things that kids maybe aren't doing, at home. So I think for me, when college came around, I was ready for that. I had already been on my own. I was already responsible. I'd already, gone out and, gone to parties and things like that. So it was not, all of a sudden I'm free and I'm going to, go kind of let loose. Like it was kind of no big deal, the same as what I was used to. And I think that helped me transition to college easier than some of the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, obviously decided to go to Yale for college and swim, but tell us about that whole process in terms of when you started getting recruited and the schools that you kind of had narrowed down to, and then why Yale?
Yeah, so I think if I remember right, they can start writing, the coaches can start recruiting you sophomore year, if I remember right. And so I would start with just letters, and then I want to say junior year they can start calling you. And so junior year is when I would start, talking to coaches, and sometimes they would come to even swim meets and watch, or talk to you at the swim meet. And so I knew that I was leaning towards an academic school, and I looked at, pretty much the Ivies and some other, well-known academic oriented schools. But the Ivies really have a great combination for swimming, especially. They're a Division I colleges, and they're fast for swimming. So you can, go to a great academic school and still have a great, fast kind of college swimming environment. And so that's what really intrigued me about that. And then I would also say Yale was in my mind from very early. I was actually born at Yale New Haven Hospital while my father was doing his residency in psychiatry up there. So there was just something in my brain about like, let's try. And thankfully the coach was really interested in me and helped, definitely, because I think Yale is down to like a 4% acceptance rate, into the latest stats. Maybe it was, 10, 20% when I was applying. So it's gone down significantly. But also part of that is there's a common application process, and you do it on the computer and you can apply everywhere. Whereas like when I applied, like it was a handwritten app.
Right.
I remember
that too. Yeah,
I wrote
for
3
sure.
different ones because I was between 3 different Ivies, and trying to decide which one to submit. And I did do early decision, which, that was a tough choice, like, because it was a binding decision. But I used my reach school, and if I got in, I'd be happy, and I'd be done, Christmas. Like I found out before Christmas break, like I was into Yale, and that made my senior year, pretty easy compared to other people's.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. I mean, so tell us about some of the things that you learned, being a college athlete at Yale. I mean, what do you feel like really helped you develop in certain areas of your life?
Yeah, and I think Ivies are also interesting in that it's not a scholarship school. So the Ivies don't have athletic scholarships. They have financial aid, but they don't have scholarships. So a lot of people, not a lot, but there is a percentage of people that will get into the Ivy League school using their sport and then actually not do the sport and help out the team and the coach. And the people that end up doing the sport kind of are like, why isn't everybody, you were recruited, this helped you, like you should do the sport. I strongly felt like I wanted to help the team. I wanted to help my coach. I was committed as if I had a scholarship. Obviously I didn't, but it was very important to me, to kind of fulfill that, promise that basically that I was going to swim and I was going to participate. And I enjoyed it and I loved it anyway. And I swam, my years there, I dropped time. A lot of people coming out of, schools as competitive as bowls, maybe they don't drop time because they had already trained so hard. But I was able to drop time in college and swim at elite level to the point that my senior year I was elected captain. And for Yale, it's a 1 captain per sport. So it's a big deal to be elected a captain of a Yale varsity sport. So that was, my senior year was really like, also swimming, but there's a management component and a leadership component that I think helped me, even today as being a CEO of a company. I was the CEO of the Yale swim team with a bunch of really great, smart, dedicated people that I would rally, for our meets in and out of the pool as well.
Yeah, and just like you're talking about now, I mean, being a student athlete is a lot of responsibility, maintaining grades, trying to drop times. You eventually became captain. But I do know that the Ivy League schools, things like Yale, Harvard, they almost have a different speed and culture to them. So do you have any good memories from swimming or just being a part of the community there that you could share with us about just times that you hold close to you?
Yeah, I mean, we would still have fun, we studied hard, for sure. But there, I joined a fraternity. I was part of, they have they call them secret societies, but they're like senior societies that you get invited to join. I was invited to join one of those. I really, that sticks out to me because that's, you already have your friends from 3 years and your swim team friends and probably your fraternity friends and the people that you lived with freshman year. But as a senior, they bring you together with basically people you've never met before. They're part of your class. And you have dinners with them and you tell life stories. And I think that was a really unique experience to Yale, and I'm friends with them. We still all keep in touch today too, from that senior year where normally you kind of have your friends set earlier on and you're not going to meet 10 to 15 new people your senior year that you're going to be friends with for your life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that they do that. And kind of to second that question, once you finish up there at Yale, you end up going to University of Florida to get your law degree. Tell us a little bit more about doing that following, the years following being at Yale, and then essentially leading into how you decide to pivot into more of the health space.
Yeah, sure. So my father's a medical school professor at University of Florida by this time, and I'm going to Yale, but I'm coming back for Gator football games or Gator basketball games, and it was it's starting to be Spurrier, Urban Meyer time, Billy Donovan time, where they're
golden era.
They're good. They're winning national championships. And Yale, while we had sports teams, again, it's no scholarships. It's not the same level of competition or crowds or just that energy. And I was it would be great to come back home. Florida was really my home by then. And attend the state school, and enjoy basketball games and football games and that kind of part of college that I felt was missing a bit at Yale. So yeah, I came back. I did my Juris Doctorate. I actually did a dual degree program with a public health degree in epidemiology. And really, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. So I did a clerkship with the Florida Supreme Court for 2 years with Justice Wells, and then I worked for Charlie Crist when he was our Attorney General, and I worked in the Solicitor General's office, which is a high-level civil appeals for the Attorney General, and so that was again another 2 years, and then I would say my career ends up transitioning slowly, but doing more venture work and then doing more general counsel work for startup companies, most of them coming out of the University of Florida. And then, being around the boardroom, I would say I was the lawyer in the room. I was the corporate secretary, learning, absorbing as much as possible, seeing, very successful companies with maybe average IP or, average technology. And then others, but a great team. And then others with great IP or great technology, but a poor team, not really making it, and just trying to understand management teams and culture and people and what makes a successful company or not. And then eventually, 2, 3, 4 years later, I'm I want to try this on my own. I don't want to just be the lawyer in the room. I've always been interested in business and, and so naturally, given kind of my experience and, in healthcare, as well as, the kind of growing up in this environment, academic, professor, father, psychiatrist, but he's an addiction psychiatrist. I was drawn to, mental health as well as addiction, and how can we create businesses that do good, but also do well?
Yeah, that's fascinating too, because it's almost as if you got a taste of what helped these other companies become successful. So you're starting to kind of build, certain types of ingredients that are going to help these companies be successful. Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned a couple of times your dad. It seems like he's definitely had a heavy influence on you. Tell us a little bit more about kind of that relationship or why you feel like his path has really helped.
Yeah, he was never really a practicing psychiatrist. He's really an inventor, researcher, thought leader, but also had experience working for different private equity groups, and diligence. They would hire him, through the University of Florida to go diligence an addiction company that they were interested in purchasing. So really got introduced to private equity through seeing, him on the diligence side of things. And then sometimes he'd be on the boards and so forth of some of these startup companies that would come out of the University of Florida. So there was a time where, we got to work together, and I'd be the secretary of the company and he'd be, on the board. And, there would just be various times throughout our lives where, the companies would intersect and we'd have the chance to work together. And I'd learn from him and he'd learn from me, and it's really a neat thing, I think, if you get a chance to work with your father, in a business sense and really have that kind of mutual respect, but not, our skill sets are very different. He's the creative kind of medical scientist mind, and I'm like let's get it done. These are the 5 things we need to do. Let's not dream about, like the things that are, we could do. Let's focus on what we need to do today to make this, successful.
And you think kind of seeing him work in that mental health space kind of inspired you to want to be in that same field as well?
I think so. And then just knowing that the field was coming like in vogue, really, like people were recognizing and then also even government, like the healthcare parity laws that were passed, so there's a lot of tailwinds as far in the field. And then I'd say that there weren't a lot of operators. There's clinicians like my father or medical doctors or psychiatrists, but there wasn't like a professionalized, management teams ready to go, try to disrupt, the mental health world.
And I want to ask too about, starting your first company and getting into that after you said you kind of realized like you wanted to break more into having your own business, but going to school and studying the different things you did, obviously highly educated, you say you got that from your father. But as any advice for other young people trying to navigate that path of like, do I want to go to university? Do I want to get experience? What would you say your insight would be based on your experience of going through law school and then deciding to go more into the business world?
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of years of my life, being and as a practicing lawyer, I took multiple bars. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and that decision to basically not be a lawyer anymore was a difficult one, and I did keep my license active, and paid the fees like a few years after just to really make sure like I'm going to be a businessman for the rest of my life and I'm not going to be a lawyer. I do think professional degrees there's a reason why, like they are a professional degree. You can practice that profession and other people can't because you went to school for that. There is a value in that, and I could always, take my bar again, and I'm a lawyer again. I think, when you go to the cost benefit analysis of, schools, and obviously the costs are rising and rising each year. I think each individual really needs to make that decision for his, or herself as to that specific degree. Is that worth it, on their life trajectory? I think there's probably studies that will show both ways. The value of a college degree is this or that. But if you went and started to work, maybe you eclipse that.
Yeah, there's a lot of intangibles. That's what I think I've learned the last few years. I did one semester. I graduated through COVID in 2020. So not only did I have a rockier GPA to get into some bigger universities, there's always a goal to go to UNF. And when I didn't get in, that just kind of sidetracked things, not to mention on top of COVID, getting the proper documentation and making it all work. But I would say the biggest thing I've learned is just like you were talking about your experiences with the people and how those relationships are built. It's really a lot of intangibles. That's what I always advocate for people. And I do even recommend college, even though I kind of didn't really work out for me.
I don't think it's necessary for everyone. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. I think that a lot of the focus, even governmental sponsor, has been push a lot of people to college, and everyone needs to go to college. And there's a lot of other avenues, and you don't need, even to grow a company like Refresh, I used some of the things I've learned, but it wasn't a prerequisite, so.
It's just like you were saying, if you mature at a younger age, you kind of bypass a lot of those learning curves that people get once you're at college, for better or for worse, but that maturing stage really.
I think that's the main thing for me, was the maturing of even just myself and my thoughts and what I wanted or what I liked to do or what I didn't like to do, so I think a lot of it was just the time that eclipsed, whether I was in school or not. And then I was working too. So sometimes I would be 2 of my masters, I was working while I was getting the masters. So I would just do it at night, kind of part-time. So yeah, I think it's going to be a personal decision, and then you got to weigh again, with the costs going up, is that degree going to really help you, at that next stage of your career?
Definitely a financial thing too for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I'm really curious too, those first couple years with Refresh, I mean, tell us kind of that perspective as an entrepreneur. Like, was there a point where you hit a wall, or what were some of the challenges you felt like you had to overcome as an entrepreneur those first couple of years?
So constant challenges, as an entrepreneur, CEO, founder. So Refresh, I had been working on a concept, similar, basically in outpatient group practices for 2-3 years before Refresh, came in existence. And we really started September 2017 as Refresh Mental Health, with an investment from a private equity firm called Lindsay Goldberg out of New York. They had actually approached me to be their CEO of a behavioral health business, but they hadn't found that business yet. And, I was able to show them kind of what I had been working on in outpatient mental health. And luckily at that time, really nobody had been working to consolidate the outpatient mental health industry. So it was a novel idea. Even though it doesn't seem like it should be, that novel. And people were doing it in primary care for years, ophthalmology, dermatology, surgery centers. There's a lot of practice consolidation right now going on in the world. But at that point in time, this is back, 2016, we were having talks, and then officially in 2017, there wasn't a group outside of maybe like a doctor owning a couple practices or a clinician owning a couple practices. There wasn't a professionalized, private equity-led group doing a consolidation in outpatient.
And when you say outpatient mental health, would you mind just providing some clarity in that and what you specialize in with Refresh Mental Health?
Sure. When I say outpatient, think of like just a doctor's office. So that's really what we were doing. We were the back office for the medical doctors, so the psychiatrists, the nurse practitioners, the psychologists, which are doctoral level, and then the therapists. So those are like the clinician workforce. And then we also have administrative, help. We have billers and coders, and there's a team behind the team.
And thinking about your leadership style and kind of how you've built this thing, because you said you had the experience with the Yale swimming team. I'm sure you really took the reins at Bolles. Being a boring student, had to keep yourself busy somehow, and I'm sure it was some form of leadership. Tell us a little bit about your style of leadership, how you accredit that to building the company, and really why it's important to your values and the way you do things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, interestingly enough, we ended back in Jacksonville, where I have, a decent network because of Bolles, really. And so actually 3 of my senior leadership team were also Bolles grads, so local talent, including my CFO, my chief development officer, and my vice president of business development. And so having people, and I only knew one of them from Bolles. One was, my CFO was a year above me at Bolles, but the others I met, kind of when I came back here. But I think having that trust was really helpful. And then I was also able to recruit my COO, another VP of development from former company that I had co-founded and was also private equity backed in the past. And I really enjoyed working with them, and I wanted to bring them forward and recruit them back over here. So I had experience with, bringing people forward into the new business, as well as this kind of like a bit of a bond, just because we went to the same high school and we trusted each other, and we knew what we were building was special or had the potential to be special. I also think Jacksonville, it's not like the big cities of like New York or Boston or San Francisco, where everyone's just kind of coming and going and looking for the next best thing. Refresh was a big deal here to be able to grow a business like that. And I never worried that like my team was going to go jump ship for something better. Like, we were committed.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that too, because I know earlier you talked about when you were on the legal side advising, you could tell that, the companies that did well had a great team. And it sounds like you had a certain values that you were looking for assembling your own team. And kind of on that note, your most important team member, I know she got her doctorate degree from, University of Florida. So tell us about kind of navigating that. Obviously your wife's a doctor, being an entrepreneur. You guys have 4 kids. Tell us about it from kind of the personal perspective of being an entrepreneur with a busy wife and busy life.
That was really hard, and when we get into like sale and like part of it is like I was on the road all the time, you know, and my kids were getting older. You know, I did a lot of refresh was when I had, you know, 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, you know, like the 4th came, you know, late. She's only 5, you know, today. So when I felt like I could travel a lot more when they were younger and they maybe didn't realize how much I was gone, you know, and I'd bring back stuff every single time I went. But I think that was difficult, you know, and we had to have help. You know, we used au pairs, which, you know, are basically a live-in from another country that would come and stay with us because her schedule was unreliable because she would be on call sometimes. You know, as a doctor, you get called in randomly, so you can't. It's just hard to plan. And when I'm out of town, you know, so we had to have help, you know, helping us. But I do think if you're going to do, you know, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to work 24/7 and you're going to really like give it all to see, you know, give it that shot. Like I do think it's best to try to do it when your kids are young or when they're out of the house. You know, like it's hard. Like I think as they start getting older, and when I'm saying older, I'm probably saying like 8, like that 8 to 17, you know, period. Then maybe that 10, you know, 9, 10 years there. Like it's helpful. They need you, and I think it's best to try to be around as much as possible. And I do think that is difficult, especially if you're growing. We had a national company. We were in 35 states. I was flying all over the place and meetings, and you know, I think it's difficult to do. If you're doing a Jacksonville company and you can build it big enough here in Jacksonville, that's a different story. But when you're trying to build more of a national company, I think it's difficult.
Yeah.
And just to kind of talk a little bit about that and remaining really persistent in what you do, because now you have the kids, you have the family, you're building a thriving company. I want to ask you a little bit about, you know, everyone would describe that like a huge success, you know, your story in general of going from Yale to multiple degrees from UF, even UPenn. You had other companies. This one's really taken off. You've even been able to, I wouldn't say like step back, but maybe lighten the load of traveling and be home more with your kids. In the company you're in, mental health and doing good for others, just like you says, you want to have a company that does good, that does well also. How would you kind of describe the distinction between becoming successful but also leading a life of significance at the same time?
That's always at the forefront. Like, yes, I've done some things, you know, in my career that I feel like have helped the world, and I want to continue to do that. But then also, how can you do, you know, whether it's nonprofit work or board work, you know, to help in other ways that maybe isn't in your core. And then also you have your family. Like your family is your biggest like asset. Like you don't want to like skirt your responsibilities and have, you know, not a cohesive family unit just because you're successful in business or you're spending all your time, you know, working on the nonprofits. So it's a continual balance.
Yeah, I love that, because one thing I've learned the last few years as I've been working alongside Brian and building is, you know, you get to a point where you really realize like the thing you want more than anything else is just like your people and your people in your life sometimes. And they might be as easily accessible as living under the same roof or like I have a brother that lives in Brooklyn. I haven't been up to visit him yet, but the idea there is just like when you can get that back for yourself. I've always believed that the time away, the time off, or the time spent with the people you really want to be around really can elevate your business. You come back, you're excited to work, you're excited to be a part of what you're doing. So I can definitely understand that concept.
You're refreshed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to ask you too, because, and I know this is kind of a personal thing for each person, and nobody's really the same when it comes to this, but, you know, for you personally, just understanding the importance of mental health and just all the different hats and the roles that you have as father, entrepreneur, husband, like what are some things that you've kind of baked into your schedule that you feel like kind of help you stay refreshed and mentally, physically, emotionally healthy in those ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think exercise, it's, you know, it's one thing that you can do, you know, each and every day, you know, or every other day, whatever you can do to make time for. Now, when I was deep in, you know, growth mode and, you know, really almost working 24/7, like I would bring my running shoes and I'd bring a bathing suit to whatever hotel I was staying, and most of the times I didn't unpack it out of my bag, you know, and I'm like, why am I packing this on all my business trips? But it was there, and there were, you know, I did unpack it sometimes, I would say that now, and hopefully in the future, like that's a new page is like, I need to try to swim like 3 times a week or whatever it is. And I'm going to work, I'm going to lift weights, or I'm going to, go for my run, or, do yoga, whatever it is that, meditation. I do all of those things. How to do it consistently when you get busy and when you have, family or whatever work obligations, that's where it's difficult, you know. But I knowing that you should, and it's ground, I think even that alone is helpful, to make you feel like you're living a more balanced life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just to kind of, I noticed the shirt when you came in, mental health, right? Mentally healthy.
Right.
Kind of shed some light a little bit, just given the industry you're in. Brian kind of foreshadowed the things that, you can use to help make you feel better between exercise. Like I remember the first time I used to deal with a lot of anger issues, and when I got into working out, for the first 4 months, I'd go to the gym and just beat the crap out of the punching bag, right? Like that's what got me into exercise. And I tell it to kids all the time, like, look, don't fight it, just go let it out. Literally fight it, I guess, and keep moving. But what do you think I'm trying to think of how I want to word it, in the men's mental health industry, what do you think the challenges men are facing, or like what are causing their problems, or what do you think the lack of what they're doing to improve them mainly focuses on?
If I do anything in my career or my life, like I hope that I can lessen the stigma of mental health, treatment, whether that's therapy, whether it's life coaching, whether that's a psychiatrist for medication management. Men are, we're tough and we're proud and we're supposed to, not have any problems and not talk. Like we're quiet, tend to be quiet, keep things to ourselves, keep things hidden. I think, slowly that's changing, and I think COVID obviously accelerated it somewhat. But I do think men in general have more problems talking about issues, and we're less open than women. And I think that's just, it's something in our nature. And I think culture and upbringing and all those things have to do with it as well. But yeah, I mean, I also, like when I was little and I had anger issues, my mom would tell me to go outside and hit a tree. I remember that. She'd be like, punch a tree. And I think I tried it like one time and I really hurt myself, and that was it, Like, I don't want to hit the tree anymore, Mom. But yeah, like whether it's boxing, whatever you need, like there is some physical aggression that men will need to get out from time to time. And you need a release, and you can't keep that all bottled up.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree, because I even, when I was a sophomore in high school, had like a really long week and actually got in a fight. And it became a massive issue. It pretty much ended my basketball career, because it was at like a practice training, and this kid just was going off. And I was like, man, I got 100 other things on my plate. The last thing I need is you in my ear. And it just pushed me over the edge. And I actually speak a good bit at high schools and talk a little bit about what I've learned over the last few years and maturing, but also like truly, just like you guys were talking about, what helps. And what was so crazy is when I talked to the coach later on, he never once asked me, what was going on? Like, why did you? He always says, well, you can't hit a kid. You don't have a spot on my team. But never did the conversation come up. And I think that's when we talk about leadership and things like that. That's where there's also a shortcoming of, if you want to come in and you can motivate people one of two ways. You can be vulnerable, or you can be the guy that comes in and is kind of like, well, we get past it. We just kind of go. So I could definitely attest to that story of, if it goes untreated, it can come out in ways that essentially can really harm your future.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because we talk about this just about probably every other episode, because, what was it, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I got into meditating, and I would say, for me personally, it was one of the most profound things that I had ever done. And just really, I think it just gives you that chance to, our brain spends so much time all day in this high activity, and we don't really have a chance to give our mind a chance to recover. Kind of like after a workout, your muscles actually grow from the recovery, right? So same with the brain activity. And so, obviously I'm big with promoting it with us and anybody that I talk to. But I guess from your perspective and being in that, side of the mental health, I guess tell us kind of your perspective on meditating and the benefits. And
I mean, I think for personally, I use it for what you're discussing. Like my brain is going nonstop, like, you know, all day long and multitasking. And it just, it's a moment of clarity. It's a moment of rest for me, like a deep breath, and try not to think about, you know, I catch myself thinking about things as I'm doing it. So I'm not like, you know, I need to get better. But that's, I think, 5 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the morning, or you could do it at night, you know, whatever fits your schedule. I think everyone can benefit from it. You know, I'd love to see, like, at some point, like, you know, like yoga and meditation be like clinically, you know, significant enough that then, you know, it's reimbursed. And it's like, you know, like that would be, you know, like dietitians now sometimes have their services reimbursed. So that's come a long way as far as like recognition that diet is important to health, you know. So like, I think there's a chance some of these things that they, you know, they're still called alternative therapies and so forth. They're not, you know, clinical per se. But I think anytime you get, you know, something reimbursed, like now all of a sudden it's, you know, a proven concept. Right. But I think we can all benefit, you know, and I group it all together, like that exercise, diet, meditation, yoga, you know, swimming, surfing, like getting out. I mean, that's getting out there in the water. Like there's something about the water that has like a healing effect in the oceans, and, you know, open water swimming. You can swim in lakes, you know, like there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I think if people tried new things, you know, like the mind awakes. I know people that do like cold water baths and like jumping and freezing. I mean,
big trend right now.
Yeah, that awakens your mind like no other. So like there are things out there that are better than just kind of, you know, retreating.
And I think too, there's almost something to be said for like treating yourself in a way that in of itself is refreshing. Like whether it's getting a massage or going to get some type of treatment, like just the fact that you're planning and making a priority is already healing you in addition to the benefits of whatever the type of treatment you're getting.
Yeah, and I think women are better at that than men again.
Right,
because,
exactly.
Like, you know, pedicures and manicure, like that, they actually come with massages. You know, like I've gotten one once and I'm like, what are you doing? You're massage, you know?
Yeah.
So like even those services, nail services come with, you know, a mini massage, right? And so I think men still, like, that's like a special occasion for our anniversary, or once a year we're on a vacation and I'm going to go get a massage, you know. But I agree, like it's total body and mind health, and those kinds of things can help, you know, in your home life as well as your work life, and the balance, because you feel like, okay, like I'm recharged. Like that 1 hour I paid for that massage, even though it was $100, or how, you know, they're not cheap, but I feel better. I'm ready to go.
Absolutely. And you probably can appreciate this as an entrepreneur. Like anytime my brain slows down, even if I just go take the dog for a 2-mile walk at night, that's when my best ideas come. You know, when you totally stop trying to think for solutions and you finally just slow down. You're like, all these aha moments come to you. And so when you make it part of your routine, then you're just going to, you know, expedite all the...
Or you remember the thing that you forgot.
Exactly,
you know, like, and you're like, oh yeah, you let it all go. And I remembered I forgot to do that other important thing. You know? So it's,
and for me,
helpful.
like, I end up connecting things that usually weren't going to be connected had I not slowed down, if that makes sense.
Well, I think the creative is a big part of what we were designed to do, and that's been a big conversation recently with like all the AI and stuff like that, and people are like, well, what are going to happen to all the jobs? And I saw a really interesting take the other day talking about, well, we can get back to doing what we do best, which is being creative and innovating. And obviously there's always going to be a role for humans to play their part regardless of how advanced tech gets. But that's why I think when we talk about the meditating, taking time away, swimming, surfing, grounding is like this new trend where it's like you just go outside with your shoes off, being at the beach even, you know, like just feeling the sand between your toes. But that is where you get to be creative, which is what we were essentially designed to do. I did want to ask, have you tried cold water therapy before?
I've swum in cold lakes
before,
real cool, but
not
not technically like
Yeah, we've talked about it here before with a chiropractor who's real big into it, and I got big into it. And the way I explain to everybody is you essentially forget all the problems you have because you just want to live through like the next 2-3 minutes. It's like any problems I had, all I got to think about is not seizing up in this bath right now. One thing I did want to ask you is now with social media and stuff like that, like I'm able to follow some people I really look up to and keep up with day to day. In relation to your career or just as a person in general, has there been like a really close mentor or even someone you've watched from afar that's been very influential in your career?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do less on social media, for sure. Like I'm not really present except for probably I do a little bit of LinkedIn through the business. But I would say, going back to sports and coaches, I would say my biggest kind of impact and mentors have been like the swim coaches over the years, which really are like almost like parental figures, as you're growing up, and especially as a boarding student at Bowles. So there's a bunch. I mean, there's probably 5 different coaches that I'd need to mention if I mention anyone by name, that really impacted my life. And it's when you're swimming, and I would swim between 2 and 5 hours every single day. You spend a lot of time with your coaches, and those would be the most impactful.
That's amazing, and so much of what we spend our time doing nowadays is working with kids through sports. But there's so many connections between what you learn in sports to how this is going to help you later on in life, and so kind of reflecting back on where all the things that you've done. What were some of those key things that you feel like have spilt over from what you learned in swimming that you apply today?
Yeah. And I love, also I love hiring, athletes too, in my work. Like if someone could balance, track and, cross country and schoolwork and family, and that's what you need. That's what you need to do to be, a hardworking, successful, productive adult. You have to learn to multitask and balance. And I think sports early on, especially if you're competing at a higher level, that's the training for life, So I think that really for me, it was, managing time, not wasting time, managing time, making sure my assignments got done, making sure I was showing up to practice on time, ready to go, and then the hard work, of an individual sport that's time-based. Like there was no fooling the clock, and you put in the time and the energy. Like when you had a good year of training, you would see results at the end of that year. So I think those would the hard work can pay off. Ultimately.
And I really appreciate that too, because like we kind of told my story, like things rise and fall at a young age on sports, and I think it's good to reflect on that of like where you fell short. And now with what we do, spend a lot of time around high level athletes. My girlfriend plays college lacrosse, and so see what she does and stuff. And it's very different now with work too, because you have a chance to, like you said, really put it in your hands. And if you can't even like follow instructions, you're going to get slapped in the face by the time you try to start a business. But tell us a little bit about what you see coming next for Refresh Mental Health. You mentioned earlier a little bit about what you see as your mission, what you would like to do over the course of the rest of your career. But tell us a little bit more about like what you would want to see next and what would necessarily make it a good finishing goal.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough about a year ago to be acquired by one of the largest healthcare companies in the whole world, United Healthcare Group, Optum, which is their healthcare services arm. So based in Minnesota. So I do spend a lot of time in Minneapolis now. But it's very it's great for us as a business, being in Jacksonville and having, really a national leader, come here, and, my employees of Refresh are going to all be now employees of Optum and United Healthcare Group. It also gives us like a tremendous amount of resources, and we're getting to do things that we would have never been able to do before, it's even just operationally. So United has a large primary care presence. And one of the things I had been interested in for years is how do you have the primary care doc, more aware of mental health, issues. And then also what would happen if we had a mental health clinician, whether that's a therapist, a psychologist, or psychiatrist, physically in the same office with your primary care physicians? Like, what would the results be? Because you're removing some of those obstacles, you're removing some of the stigma, you're removing some of the onus that's on the patient, which would normally they'd give them a referral. Here, call this, like they're not going to, or even if I'm going to call for you, I'm going to make an appointment for you, maybe they don't show up, but like if there's an office right there and I can walk you next door, and I'm going to introduce you to
make
the
some
therapist.
connections.
I think you're breaking some of those barriers, and I think that as an entry point is really interesting. For me, is like, how can we have more people in regular conversations, regular help, so that nothing really spirals out of control, and we can keep, like your physical health, like you want to try to go for, a physical health appointment once a year just to check on things. Just same in mental health, there's like a maintenance to it, and whether you can do it yourself with meditation and yoga, or whether you want to talk to a life coach or a therapist or a psychiatrist, I think that primary care visit is a really interesting entry point to catch and help people.
I love that, because too, it's like how many physical ailments are really manifested by something mental, right? How many times do people just not in a good place that physically they start to have issues that a doctor can't really fix because it's not medical. I mean, what I mean? It's more mental. And so the fact that, like you said, you're bringing those two together just makes sense.
Yes. Even like there's things like panic attacks, right?
Yeah.
Which some can be misdiagnosed as like a heart attack over the phone. So like if someone's having a panic attack, like sometimes the doc will be like, go to the emergency room. And that's also a chance where we can save, because we know the costs keep going up and up and up, and it's not sustainable. We can't just have more and more healthcare costs. So there's got to also be ways where we can help reduce costs, potential ER visits or something, So there are things that we can hopefully do together now that we're part of this large health system that hopefully make healthcare more sustainable for everybody.
I've just got one more question for me.
No hurry. I was getting...
But I was going to ask you too. So, kind of on that note, knowing what you know, knowing obviously your wife is a doctor as well, like, and you guys have 4 kids, and basically the same kind of spread as ours. Mine are 7 to 15. But like, as a parent, what are some of the values / things that you really want to implement into your own kids as a parent?
It's constant, and every kid is very different.
Yeah.
I've learned, I also came from a family of 4. I didn't really recognize how different we all were until we're adults, and how my parents had to maneuver that while hopefully treating everybody the same with the same opportunities. But yeah, I think with my kids, it's hopefully a similar, value system, than I was brought up in, and give them all the opportunities, but it's also up to them to make the right choices, to seize those opportunities, and make the best out of, their own lives. Because as parents, like, we can only do so much, right? It's like the saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. Like, if your kid is up, he's supposed to be doing his homework on his computer, he looks like he's doing his homework on his computer, but he's playing a video game, like, that's his bad decision or her bad decision. Like, I can't check the screen every second, to make sure that they're actually doing their homework when they're telling me they're doing their homework. So I do believe there's a level of personal responsibility, even for kids, that they need, because even as a parent, if you did once they're out on their own, they're going to make those bad choices anyway.
Right.
So like, you're almost better off having them make those bad choices when they're younger and when they're in the house, and you can hopefully course correct, then everything's perfect until they graduate high school, and then forget about, it's all downhill from there.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want that. So like, and I had my own, like, everyone has their own things in life where you make mistakes, and I've had businesses that don't work. Like, everyone, you have to learn from your failures. You learn more from failures and mistakes than you do from things that actually go right, And
on that topic, what I want to ask is, we touched on earlier talking about men mainly who kind of struggle to come up and speak more about what they're going through. But honestly, for men, women, even children, because I know that could be a tough conversation. Like when you've got the kid in private school, they're crushing in sports, they got good grades. It's almost like, and especially when parents have high expectations, and it can be hard for them to voice that. So in general, what would you say people need to understand about approaching people with their issues and how they can be more comfortable with doing that?
Yeah, I think it's part of it is just having these these conversations, right? Like probably 20 years ago, it was very rare, even just to talk about mental health, amongst three guys, right? Like I think part of the getting the stigma out is just conversations and normalizing, whether, you're at a life coach level or whether you want to talk to a therapist or, multiple things, I having those conversations, and I think people have them more with me because they know I'm also in the field, and they come to me asking recommendations or, whatever, but at least that's happening. And I think that's, to me, the most important, step is like, it's not like since when did we hide like going to see, your primary care doc, or like you broke your bone and you have to go see an orthopedist? Like why is that shameful? It's not, and same with going to see a psychiatrist. It's not shameful. It should never have been shameful. It's a doctor to help your mind, So like, that's really, if anything that I'm contributing to the field, I'm hoping that, more people would be accepting of like, listen, this is, and actually I think it's performance enhancing. Like I've said this before too, like if you go see a therapist once a week, it's almost like a personal trainer to me. Like that's helpful. Like that's helpful to yourself. It's helpful to your family, your kids, your wife. Like it makes you a better person. Like, so, it's not shameful. It's like, I want to help myself be a better father, be a better spouse, be a better coworker, whatever it is, like that they can help.
Yeah, and I actually grew up I got two older brothers and a little sister, just mom at home. So I think I grew up a little bit more in touch with it. We kind of went through some things, and I actually had a therapist for a while that was pretty revolutionary to my high school career. And, rest her soul, she passed a few years ago, and I never really got another one. But there's times where you wish you could kind of call upon that person because you really build a deep relationship. I think that's what people miss. Is like, sure, you probably pay them at the end of the day, but I mean, there was one point in time where I was trying to go on this trip, and she knew I was 14, 15 years old, working 5 days a week, and I had something come up that it was like a friend's trip. We were going to go see a friend graduate, and I just didn't have the money to go. And I was expressing it to her that was like stressing me out, and she wrote me a check that day and was like, go see your friend graduate. And I think, again, that's what people miss about the conversation is they're genuinely people that want to see you do better. It's not like they're going to give you the whole blueprint, but you need to get it off your chest and see what the right steps are to move from there. But yeah, I've really appreciated the conversation between the three of us today. I know it's definitely going to impact a lot of people, young, old, wherever they're at in life, men, women, children, anything. So really appreciate you being here today, talking a little bit about what you do. Tons of great insight for everybody. Just one last question here for you. I ask all of our guests this question. What part of the Grit Creed resonates most with you, and why?
So there's a couple. I like a couple. I mean, it's a great.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, it's a great creed. I've actually sent it to a couple people today when I was reading it through. But I like the second line. Again, just I don't find an excuse. I find a way. I think that's a great, I guess 2 sentences, but, you can find an excuse for everything, right? Like, and a lot of things seem impossible, but you can find ways, there are very limited things that are impossible, So I like that one. I also like the one where it says, I will try and try and try again. I didn't go into like details, but like, every successful entrepreneur, like they fail and fail and fail and things don't work. And even in Refresh, like there's always challenges. There's constant challenges in your business. There's times where you think you're going to, we went through a COVID period, which ended up being a good thing for my business because we were all in person. We had to switch, 95+% to telemedicine at that time. But there was a couple, 3-4 week period of time where I was like, are we going to survive? Because all of our offices had to be closed. We weren't yet on telemedicine. we didn't know how it was all going to work. We didn't know the demand was going to go through the roof. You know, we had people we had furloughed some of the staff because we didn't have offices opened. So that was just one example of like just challenging times where I was like, goodness, like I built this company and it's supposedly some great company, but we're about to go out of business, you know, because of something completely out of our control. So I do think like that, you just got to keep trying, you know, like, and you're not always going to be right, but don't give up. Like, you know, like it's worth trying and trying again. And then of course I like the mentally, physically, emotionally resilient line. And I think that's going back to families and kids. Like if we can create the next generations to be those three things, you know, we've done our job. You know, there's that. And again, I think sports are an important part of like becoming resilient, you know, and you also learn about failure in sports. Like I didn't win every swim meet. Like, you know, that doesn't happen. That's not possible. You know, you lose a lot, you know? So I think sports and life and work and family, I think you have to learn, you know, there's no straight line up. It's a jagged line and you're hopefully going in the right direction.
Love that. Well, we really appreciate you being here today. It's been awesome having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sure,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, that's it for us here today at the Grit.org podcast. If you enjoyed Steven's story, please share it with someone you think it would resonate with or impact. Check out all of our other episodes. Refresh Mental Health. Again, you can check out Steven on LinkedIn, a number of other places. That's all for us. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Grit.org podcast.